Hey, what's up, guys? So this is going to be the 63rd opening that I like to share with you, which is called Wild Rabbit. So rabbit is actually the name of the Japanese, way of naming an opening because it's an animal, and usually it is equivalent to the rose variation, and Wild Rabbit is just basically deviating that by one move. So this is probably one of the earliest opening sequence and probably one of the shortest opening sequence that you can have when it kickstarts the name of Wild Rabbit. So basically, it starts off with F5, followed by White playing a perpendicular move, opening to D6, and then finally over here, instead of playing the usual rose or rabbit move to C5, in fact, you play C6, and that kind of kickstarts the Wild Rabbit opening. So this is kind of probably one of the earliest variation that you can perform. So it will kind of catch your opponent off guard a little bit for people who are playing white and playing perpendicular opening, and it kind of limits the option in a sense that usually white wouldn't want to go to either of these moves, given that they know that this is the best move for sure. So it kind of funnels them into that particular opening that you most likely want them to go to. So the following sequence would then be, kind of standard for Wild Rabbit. So over here, basically white goes to F4, black goes to E6, and then more often than not, we see either one of these three moves. I believe G5 is the most common one. G6 is also playable, and of course C2. I'm sorry, C5 is probably one of the most common ones together with G5 as well, because usually you just want to one disc flip and one a straight cut. And I think F6 is also sometimes played by players who don't know this opening. So I would say that this opening as black, it kind of follows a particular variation from white's parallel opening, which you will see in the future videos for opening sequences. But let's run through the standard sequence. So typically you would probably choose G5, given that G6 is a diagonal cut. Usually straight cuts might be preferred over diagonal cuts right at the start of the opening. So typically G5 goes, and then followed by black going to D3, you jumping into the center of this row that he just created, and at the same time there isn't any way for black to gain access to either of these moves at C3 or C5 to regroup. So then on, black would jump into E3, and if you were to go to F6, you allow black to regroup nicely to C5. So the best move over here that is recommended, instead of allowing black to regroup over there by playing F6, you just kind of snatch that move of C5, and at the same time you control this mini diagonal of D4 and E5 this, such that black does not have access to this. And of course, if black wanted to directly forcefully create an access, that would mean playing C3, which is way too loud and kind of wrapping around the entire wrapping around the entire white's shape, and therefore creating many moves for white. So over here, the best counter would then be B3. So I think the following sequence over here is probably, arguably one of the most common resultant position that you can have when Wild Rabbit is played. So over here, white would then choose a few variations to play. I think typically one would choose to respond either C3 or B4 because you want to immediately respond to this C4 disc that black just flipped. So typically you want to centralize over here. I personally also like to explore the D7 move over here, so that black is kind of just forced to play into F6, and then it makes it simpler for white to perhaps centralize in this position. So this might be a little counterintuitive for white, even though it's just a one disc flip. But trying to weigh E2 over B4 in terms of priority could be, fairly challenging in some sense. But on the concept that you don't want to obstruct your own consequent moves, if you play B4 and create C4, this potentially poisons E2 in the future. But if you play E2 first and then you try to go for B4, the E2 move doesn't really obstruct B4 or doesn't really poison B4. Of course, if you were to play D2, and then of course that would potentially poison your future B4 move because you have to flip one more disc along the diagonal of C3. So essentially, that is the Wild Rabbit opening. I would say it's I think it's an uncommon opening overall, and you basically give up quite a bit of an advantage. I believe it's a -4 opening, and I think in general it's difficult to follow up. But if you practice it as a book, it shouldn't be too bad because it limits options for white, and pretty much people only have that many standard replies to some of these variations. So I would recommend this for advanced players and above. And thank you very much for joining me with this opening video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.